So let's talk about the British Constitution and how the British form of government was different than other forms of government at this time. I already talked about how James I had become King of England through a bit of an inheritance fluke after originally being the King of Scotland. This was a bit problematic for James and for England in general because Scotland was Calvinist while England was Anglican and Ireland was Catholic. In this small area you had three distinct religions practiced by three distinct ethnic groups that occupied three distinct geographic areas. This division caused conflicts in Parliament, which was the House of Government of Britain. Parliament was divided into two houses, the House of Lords, which was for the nobles and the clergy, and the House of Commons, which was, sounds like it's for everybody, but it was really for the landed gentry, the new bourgeois class, wealthy businessmen. After James, King Charles I had tension between the different religious groups in his realm, including the Puritans, who were a branch of Calvinists, the Scots, and the Anglicans. Parliament tried to assert its control over the king, being that they had direct right to rule over the realm, the king as a constitutional monarch, and the king tried to assert his authority over Parliament as king, resulting in what used to be called the English Civil War, but is now called the War of the Three Kingdoms because there was England, Ireland, and Scotland, effectively occupying three different positions. Parliament was more trying to uphold the cause of the Puritans, who were a branch of Calvinism, but claimed they were a part of the Anglican faith. Parliament was able to recruit farmers called yeomen to their cause through appealing to them through religious means. The leader of these yeomen, the leader of Parliament, was Oliver Cromwell. We had a bit of a situation where the south of England was controlled by Parliament, with the north controlled by King Charles. Charles controlled the north and Scotland because that was his hereditary lands, because he was a descendant of James I, who was King of Scotland. So you had the south fighting the north. Cromwell's forces defeated the Royalists and took power in 1648 and put the king and other Royalists on trial. Charles I was executed in 1649, and his family was sent into exile. Many Royalists, or supporters of Royalist sympathizers, considered his son Charles II to be the rightful king. Cromwell and his supporters declared England to be a commonwealth or a republic, and himself as Lord Protector of England, so Parliament in control of England. When Cromwell's system worked until his death in 1660, his son took over briefly, but didn't have the dynamism of his father. Parliament, seeing that the country was slipping into anarchy, recognized the exiled Charles II, the son of Charles I, as the rightful king and restored the monarchy. But with some caveats, the new king had to promise religious toleration and more dialogue with Parliament, and give more control over to Parliament. The Puritans who instituted the initial rebellion were persecuted and fled, most of them to the Americas, and the Scots were saddled with bishops to try to rein in their Calvinism and convert them to Anglicanism. Charles died childless, probably because of all his years spent in exile, and had trouble finding a wife and trouble bringing up children. And his brother James II, became king. The problem was that James was Catholic, and immediately began to appoint Catholics to key positions and maintaining a standing army that was loyal to him, much like Louis XIV. The Protestants realized that James's young Catholic son would be heir, so they invited James' daughter, Mary, to claim the throne with her husband, who was a Protestant. Her husband was the leader of Protestant Holland, William of Orange, and he invaded England ostensibly to put his wife on the English throne with Parliament's backing. James fled into exile in France, ending his reign, essentially. It's called the Glorious Revolution because it was a revolution that didn't involve any actual bloodshed. There were no actual battles fought. The new king, because he was installed by Parliament, found he had to give more power to Parliament. And in 1689, Parliament passed the Bill of Rights, which ensured that Parliament would be an equal partner, not a junior partner, and created a limited monarchy, meaning that Parliament actually ruled and the king was a limited monarch. But still, the divisions were the official church being Anglican, but Scotland being Calvinist and Ireland being Catholic remained. Despite this, by 1707, the kingdoms of Scotland and England were officially united, with Ireland being held as fief by the English. This revolution was justified by the English way of thinking, best articulated by John Locke, who wrote that all humans had natural rights, and these natural rights were the basis for the Bill of Rights written by Parliament. Locke said that if these natural rights were being suppressed by a monarch, it was the duty of the people to rebel. So because James was suppressing the natural rights, religious freedom, the people had a right to rebel. This invoked classical Greek ideas and served as an inspiration to the founding fathers of America, who we'll talk about in an upcoming chapter. This map shows you the War of the Three Kingdoms, or the English Civil War. You can see a couple of different things. The mainly Anglican areas, the areas with a strong Puritan presence. Remember, Puritans were a branch of Calvinism. The Calvinist areas in Scotland, and the Catholic areas in Ireland and Scotland. And these areas in Ireland would indicate where Anglicans were settled. And you can see during the Civil War, the South was under the control of Parliament, while the North and Scotland was under control of the king. An artistic or cultural expression of faith and power was Baroque. Baroque art emerged out of the Renaissance during a time when monarchical power, the power of the monarch, was on the rise. And often a theme of Baroque art was triumphant glory, power, and exuberance. National monarchies, the Catholic Church, were patrons of Baroque artists and wanted this dramatic imagery movement to depict excitement in their victories. Paul Rubens was a leading Baroque artist who painted numerous classical scenes, portraits, and altarpieces for France, England, Spain, Flanders, and the Catholic Church. Gentilici was an Italian female painter. It was quite rare for women to be artists, or at least celebrated artists. And she made works for the kings of England, the Medici, who ruled parts of Italy, and was the first woman to be admitted to the Florentine Academy for the Arts and Drawing. Rembrandt was a Protestant painter in Holland who was famous for his dark colors and many portraits of Dutch townspeople and religious subjects. The dominant artist of Catholic Italy was Bernini, who sculpted extreme motion and form out of stone and marble. Bernini designed St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. Similar to Bernini was Charles Le Brun, who designed the Gilded Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. After the fire of 1666 destroyed London's Gothic Cathedral, St. Paul's, the architect Christopher Wren redesigned it with a large dome-like St. Peter's, with twin towers reminiscent of the previous Gothic design, which really, if anything, highlighted the similarities between Anglicanism and Catholicism that still existed at this time. A new type of painting was genre painting. which was different from the Baroque in that it didn't depict victorious monarchs and power and glory, but everyday life. And this everyday life, this depiction of the arts of everyday life, is a depiction of the changing nature of people, and that people had a broader implication in the power of the state, best exemplified by Britain. So this genre where you had the Bill of Rights and control by Parliament. So genre painting was everyday life, street scenes, people in cafes. Bruegel was the most famous painter. He was Flemish, and he would paint peasants doing their chores, but also dancing, celebrating weddings, drinking, having fun, that type of thing. Another popular style of painting was landscapes and still lifes, which were popular among Calvinists who disapproved of religious painting, believing it was a form of iconography. This is an example of Baroque art. You can see this sort of classical scene, hearkening back to the days of Greece and Rome. This, bold colors, this expression, the movement of the bodies. This is a fine example of Baroque art. Another example of Baroque art, you can see again the beheading here, the woman holding him down by his beard and his hair, the other slicing through his neck with a sword. So again, this dramatic, violent scene, bold colors, movement, example of Baroque art. This is Rembrandt. This is one of the artists. This is a self-portrait. This is a religious scene, and this is a religious scene that's meant to have more of a genre feel, where you have Jesus, obviously, but you have this sort of genre feel. This is what a peasant's house might look like. This is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, sometimes called the Agony of St. Teresa, in which St. Teresa had a religious experience and described her love of God like an arrow piercing her breast. And you can see this here in this statue that's in St. Peter's. This is St. Peter's Square in Rome. You can see this classical looking structure. This was designed by Bernini. This would be an example of Baroque architecture. This is the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. This is meant to instill you with both respect for the monarch and respect for the art. And the way the room is designed is meant to convey to you the power of the monarch. This is St. Paul's in London. You can see the similarity to St. Peter's, but the difference in the fact that it has two towers, more like a Gothic cathedral, than St. Peter's, which has the dome. But it's still, you can see the similarity between St. Paul's and St. Peter's in the Vatican. This is another example of genre painting, peasants dancing. And you can see this sort of taken from the life, almost like a photograph type scene. There is an example of what peasant life may have been like at this time. So I've managed to finish it in 2 videos, which is a bit faster than I was planning on doing. And to be honest, I rushed it a bit to make sure I could fit it into 2 videos and not bleed into a third. So make sure you've read the chapter and make sure you're prepared, because there is a quiz on this material that I'm going to make available as soon as I post this video. You'll be asked, one of the reasons I didn't mention all of the artworks is you'll be asked in the quiz to name some of the artworks. So make sure you've read the chapter because it's in there, but I don't want to give away the answers in the video. So make sure you have indeed watched the video and read the chapter. You'll need to do both in order to do well on the quiz. So the quiz you'll have all week to do. It will be due before our next class. So it'll be due at midnight on the Monday, midnight on the Sunday before our class next Monday. Next class, weather allowing, will be an in-class class.